Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're taking a closer look at Japanese organizational management during the Showa era. We're using Chapter 2 of Reinventing Beyond Ancient Wisdom of Japan as our guide. And our focus isn't just on what worked back then, but really digging into the limitations, the drawbacks, and what that might tell us about, business challenges today.
That's right. It's interesting because these management ideas were, well, they were incredibly successful for a time, weren't they? Key to Japan's post-war economic miracle. So understanding why they eventually became limitations means looking beyond that success. We need to analyze the downsides, especially when the world around them changed.
Okay, so let's start with that hierarchical structure. The source paints a picture of a really rigid command chain, very top-down. Orderly, yes, but it sounds like it made things pretty slow.
Oh, absolutely. The text points out that any idea or even a problem found on the front lines had to go up through so many layers. Supervisor, department head, maybe even higher. Each step took time. So, a simple proposal could get stuck for weeks, maybe longer.
Right, and imagine you're that frontline employee with a good idea. Pretty frustrating, I'd guess.
Exactly. And it wasn't just frustrating. It meant missed opportunities. While Japanese companies were waiting for approvals, competitors, especially international ones, could move much faster. Market share was lost.
Yeah, the source mentions this wasn't a huge problem during the high growth years, but things changed, especially after the bubble economy burst and global competition really ramped up. Then that slowness became a major weakness.
A critical weakness. And it wasn't just the speed. There was also this issue of information filtering. As information traveled up the hierarchy, it could get, well, distorted. Or key details might be left out, maybe to make things look better for the boss.
So the people at the top weren't always getting the full picture.
Often they weren't. It wasn't necessarily malicious, sometimes just, lack of understanding or wanting to smooth things over. But the result was decisions made based on incomplete, maybe even inaccurate information, disconnected from reality on the ground.
That makes sense. You need good intel for good decisions. Did the source mention any attempts to fix this within the hierarchy itself?
It did, actually. Things like trying to strengthen systems for bottom-up proposals, maybe empowering middle managers more, or encouraging senior leaders to actually go and talk directly to frontline staff.
So even back then, there was some recognition that the top-down flow needed help.
Yes, there was an awareness that you needed ways to get those ground-level insights up the chain more effectively to kind of counteract the natural bottlenecks in filtering.
Which kind of leads us naturally to what we see more today, flatter organizations. The idea being you delegate more authority downward so things can get sorted out faster where the problems actually happen.
Right. That trend towards flatter structures is really a response to that need for speed and agility that the old hierarchies struggled with. But, the source also notes that hierarchy isn't entirely bad. It does clarify who's in charge, who's responsible for what. The key is making the decision-making within that structure faster, more streamlined. And maybe that's where, digital tools can really help today.
And it's not just the structure, is it? It implies a shift in leadership style, too. Leaders need to actually understand what's happening on the ground and be willing to let go, to delegate. That's different from just giving orders.
Absolutely. It raises questions about leadership adaptability. The skills needed in that stable, hierarchical Showa era aren't necessarily the same ones needed now. You need leaders who trust their teams, who empower them.
Okay, let's shift gears. Let's talk about seniority-based promotion and lifetime employment, another cornerstone of Showa management. On the surface, it sounds stable, builds loyalty, the source confirms that, but what were the downsides?
Well, it's that paradox again, isn't it? Systems built for stability can become rigid. Lifetime employment fostered loyalty, yes, and kept knowledge in-house. But the seniority system, promoting people mainly based on how long they've been there rather than skill or performance, that had real drawbacks.
Like what specifically?
Well, imagine being a talented, high-performing, younger employee. You see people less capable getting promoted ahead of you just because they're older. That's incredibly demotivating. And the source suggests this led to talented people leaving, seeking out companies where merit actually mattered more.
Yeah, I can see that. If your hard work doesn't get rewarded, why stick around? And what about the impact on the overall organization?
It could lead to a kind of complacency, especially among mid-career or older employees. If promotion is almost guaranteed by time, the drive to keep learning, keep pushing, might fade. Plus, it didn't guarantee the best people ended up in leadership roles. You could rise up just by sticking around, even if you weren't the most competent leader.
And lifetime employment itself, while good for security, could become a burden for companies, right? Especially in tough economic times.
Definitely. Companies felt obligated to keep people on even when business was down, straining resources. And for employees, that security blanket could, paradoxically, reduce the motivation for self-improvement. Why push yourself to learn new skills if your job is safe anyway? It also meant companies often overlooked hiring people mid-career from the outside. So you lack that infusion of new ideas, different perspectives.
So a system meant for stability ended up potentially stifling dynamism and flexibility. And the source really stresses that today's world needs that flexibility, merit-based systems being able to move talent where it's needed.
Exactly. The globalized digital economy demands agility. Rigid systems based purely on tenure just don't cut it anymore. That's why you see the push towards performance reviews, more flexible contracts.
But the source is nuanced, isn't it? It doesn't say throw out everything. It mentions the value of security, long-term development, suggests finding a balance.
Right. It's not necessarily about completely abandoning the idea of loyalty or long-term careers. It's about finding ways to blend that stability with a clearer recognition of performance and ability. Maybe keep some elements of seniority, but make merit a much bigger factor in promotion and rewards. And it also highlights the need for employment models that support different ways of working, flexible hours, remote work, and make it easier to bring in outside talent.
Okay, let's link this to another point, flexibility and innovation. The emphasis on stability and tradition in the Showa-Era sounds like it made companies resistant to change.
Yes, there's often that trade-off, isn't there? Stability is good, but too much can lead to inertia. The source is quite clear that many companies got comfortable with their existing success models and were, well, reluctant to change, even when markets started shifting.
And the hierarchy we talked about earlier probably didn't help. Slow decision-making, maybe not enough communication between departments.
Precisely. Ideas from the ground took too long to get approved, if they got approved at all. And departments often worked in silos, not really collaborating effectively on new initiatives. Decision-making was concentrated at the top, often removed from the changing realities of the market or technology.
So innovation suffered. New ideas and technologies were slow to be adopted.
That's what the source suggests. Companies tended to cling to what had worked in the past, even when it was becoming obsolete. There's a reluctance to embrace the uncertainty that comes with real innovation. And those seniority and lifetime employment systems likely played a role too. If advancement isn't based on taking risks or being creative, why bother?
And the culture itself, the emphasis on group harmony might that have discouraged people from speaking up with unconventional ideas.
Very likely. If the main goal is consensus and avoiding conflict, rocking the boat with a potentially disruptive idea might not be welcomed. It raises that important point about psychological safety. Do people feel safe proposing something new, something risky? If not, innovation gets stifled. You end up with groupthink and complacency.
And in today's world, that lack of flexibility and slow innovation is a huge disadvantage. Companies stuck in old ways are losing out, especially in tech.
Absolutely. Adaptability and innovation are critical advantages now. The source points to solutions like, well, flattening structures, delegating authority, using performance evaluations, but also fostering a culture where it's okay to experiment, even okay to fail sometimes.
It really seems to come back to leadership again, doesn't it? Leaders need to actively encourage new ideas and initiative.
Yes, leadership has to shift from control to empowerment, creating that safe space for ideas, valuing different perspectives, encouraging learning from mistakes that's crucial for innovation to thrive.
Now, there's a darker side to this, too. The source talks about overwork and health issues being quite prevalent.
Yes, that's a really concerning aspect. The whole work hard as a virtue idea became deeply embedded. Combined with the loyalty expectations of lifetime employment, it created this culture where incredibly long hours and intense stress were just normal,
Yeah.
expected even, often at a terrible cost to people's health.
The term karoshi death from overwork really highlights how serious it got. It wasn't just being tired.
No, it was devastating. Strokes, heart attacks, suicides linked directly to work pressure. And it wasn't just the hours. The source mentions intense pressure, maybe poor relationships at work, strict supervision, all contributing to mental health problems too. The stakes felt very high under lifetime employment.
And presumably that level of exhaustion and stress impacts productivity too.
Of course, people are less focused, make more mistakes, the quality of work suffers, and you lose good people because they burn out or get sick. It's just not sustainable, especially now with labor shortages in many areas.
What solutions does the source point to?
Things like, well, Basic improvements in working conditions, obviously, but also real work style reforms, rethinking how work gets done, maybe limiting hours, streamlining tasks, and crucially, providing proper mental health support.
It sounds like a fundamental shift was needed.
Definitely. Things like flexible work options, telecommuting, flex hours help, and shifting performance focus from hours clocked to actual results and quality. But ultimately, it requires rethinking the core culture, moving away from just glorifying hard work and recognizing that employee health and well-being are actually essential for the business to succeed long-term.
That's a powerful point. Okay, let's address another critical issue, the limited opportunities for women in these Showa-era companies.
Yes, this is deeply problematic. Even when companies needed workers, the culture was overwhelmingly male-centric. Women were often channeled into auxiliary roles, sort of support staff, with very little chance for career progression or leadership.
And societal norms played a big part, the whole men work, women manage the home idea.
Exactly. Those gender roles were deeply ingrained. There was often an expectation, sometimes explicit, that women would just quit when they got married or had children. And because of that expectation, companies were less likely to invest in women's long-term development, especially within the lifetime employment and seniority systems. Why promote someone if you assume they'll leave?
So women were denied chances to develop skills and motivation, stuck in roles that didn't use their full potential.
Which was a huge loss, obviously, for the women themselves, but also for the companies. They missed out on talent, on diverse perspectives. That lack of diversity hurts innovation and competitiveness.
And support systems were lacking too, for childcare, maternity leave.
Generally, yes. Policies were often inadequate, and the workplace culture wasn't very understanding or accommodating. It made it incredibly difficult for women to balance work and family. So talented women were often forced out or had their careers stalled. And even as things improved somewhat in society, the source notes that limitations in hiring and promotion persisted, leading to a real lack of female role models in senior positions.
What kinds of solutions were proposed?
Things like gender-neutral evaluations, judging performance, not gender, much better support for work-life balance, proper maternity and parental leave, flexible work options, but also a fundamental shift in awareness within companies actively working to support women's careers and value their contributions equally.
It requires tackling both the systems and the underlying culture, it seems.
Absolutely. It's about creating a genuinely equitable environment where talent and contribution are what matter, regardless of gender.
Okay, another interesting characteristic mentioned is a strong tendency towards risk avoidance, trying to maintain stability, but maybe missing out on growth.
Yes, it's that stability versus opportunity trade-off again. An excessive focus on not failing can mean you also miss chances to succeed significantly. The source suggests this risk aversion led to a passive attitude towards new ventures, new investments. Companies became less competitive internationally because others were willing to take more calculated risks.
And this ties back to the culture of stability, lifetime employment, seniority. Managers maybe didn't want to rock the boat.
Exactly. If the system rewards maintaining the status quo, there's less incentive to champion something new and potentially risky, even if it has high potential upside. You saw this in hesitation to invest in new technologies or business areas. They stuck with what they knew and sometimes got left behind.
And was there a culture of blaming individuals if things did go wrong?
It seems so. A fear of failure, where mistakes were heavily penalized, naturally leads people to make conservative choices. Don't propose something radical if failure means serious consequences for your career. The source even links it to the collectivist culture. A desire to avoid any negative impact on the group could discourage unprecedented ideas. Safety first, always.
Which, again, becomes a problem in a fast-moving global market where taking smart risks is often necessary.
Precisely. Agility and calculated risk-taking are key now. The proposed solutions focus on changing that mindset, building a culture where failure isn't catastrophic, but seen as a learning opportunity, encouraging experimentation.
And maybe managing risk more strategically, like using pilot projects.
Right. Not being reckless, but being smarter about risk. Diversifying, testing ideas on a smaller scale, getting diverse inputs to make better judgments about which risks are worth taking.
Connected to all this, the source also mentions poor information sharing, flowing top-down, but not necessarily efficiently or sideways.
Yes, the hierarchy again. Information often got stuck going up or didn't flow well between departments. Relying on those strict vertical lines, plus the silo effect where departments kept to themselves, created real communication barriers.
And the impact. Delays in solving problems on the ground.
That's a key one. If the people doing the work don't get the information they need quickly, or if problems they spot take ages to get reported upwards, things stagnate. The source gives examples like manufacturing issues taking too long to fix, or sales teams being slow to react to market shifts because the info wasn't flowing.
And if all the important information is held at the top, does that disempower people lower down?
It certainly can. If you don't have the information or the authority to make decisions, you tend to become more passive. Just wait for instructions. And the decisions made at the top might be out of touch anyway, due to that filtering we discussed. Collaboration between departments also suffered badly. If information isn't shared, teams can end up working at cross purposes, duplicating effort, wasting resources.
Even basic communication sounds like it was sometimes weak. Relying on formal reporting, people may be hesitant to speak up.
Yes, less open dialogue, less informal sharing of ideas or concerns, especially from lower-level staff who might feel intimidated or that their input wasn't valued.
So how to fix that? Better systems for bottom-up communication, more openness, tech.
All of the above, really. Creating clear channels for feedback from all levels. Fostering a culture where open communication is encouraged and expected. And yes, leveraging technology, shared platforms, internal networks to make information more accessible and transparent across the organization. But management has to lead by example, actively sharing information and breaking down those silos.
All right, let's touch on human resource rigidity, another consequence of lifetime employment and seniority.
Yes, these systems, while stable, made it hard to be flexible with people, hard to move talent where it was most needed, especially as skills requirements changed. With lifetime employment, people often stayed in the same area for a long time. They might become very specialized, but maybe lacked broader skills or adaptability when, say, digitalization came along.
And the seniority system made it hard to promote based on actual ability for a new role.
Right. You might have young, capable people stuck, while older employees get leadership roles that aren't necessarily best suited for, simply due to tenure. It hinders putting the right person in the right job. Plus, that focus on internal promotion meant less fresh blood, fewer external perspectives coming in, which can lead to groupthink and make it harder to adapt to global competition.
So this rigidity made it difficult to tackle new challenges, like moving into new business areas.
Exactly. If your workforce isn't adaptable, if people haven't had opportunities to develop new skills or move into different roles, pivoting the whole organization becomes incredibly difficult. Digital transformation is a classic example where this rigidity caused problems.
And the solutions proposed focus on breaking that rigidity, more flexibility, performance-based systems, bringing in outside talent.
Precisely. Rethinking lifetime employment and seniority to allow for more evaluation based on skills and performance. Integrating meritocracy more deeply. Actively recruiting external and mid-career talent. And crucially, investing in employee development training, education, job rotation to build that adaptability within the workforce.
Okay, one final point from the source. A potential lack of competitive spirit internally. Harmony was prized, maybe too much.
It's that cultural emphasis again. Valuing the collective and internal harmony is positive in many ways, good for coordination. But the potential downside was that individual drive, ambition, and healthy competition might have been suppressed. People saw themselves primarily as part of the group, with fewer chances to shine individually or get rewarded for outstanding personal contribution.
And lifetime employment and seniority reinforced that. Less need to compete if advancement wasn't primarily based on merit.
Correct. If your path is largely set by time, the incentive to outperform your peers is reduced. And the hierarchy might have also discouraged people from challenging the status quo or pushing bold new initiatives, which often involves a degree of internal competition or risk.
So suppressing competition might have unintentionally suppressed innovation and adaptability too.
That's the argument. If everyone is focused on fitting in and maintaining harmony, you might lose that creative tension, that drive to find better ways that comes from encouraging individual initiative and even some level of constructive competition. It could also limit growth opportunities for talented younger staff and reduce the overall diversity of thought if people hesitate to stand out.
So the solutions involve bringing back some element of healthy competition. Performance evaluations, maybe team goals that encourage striving.
Yes, things like clear, performance-based evaluations. Structuring work so there are opportunities for individuals and teams to excel and be recognized, but also fostering a culture that encourages initiative, tolerates mistakes as learning opportunities, and values new ideas, creating an environment where people want to strive and contribute their best. It's about finding that balance between collaboration and healthy competition.
Okay, so wrapping up our deep dive into Showa-era management drawbacks, based on the source, we've seen how systems like strict hierarchy, seniority, lifetime employment, while providing stability initially, created major hurdles later on. Things like slow decisions, lack of flexibility, stifled innovation, overwork, inequality, risk aversion, poor communication, HR rigidity, and maybe even a dampened competitive spirit.
Exactly. It's a clear reminder that management approaches aren't timeless. What works brilliantly in one context, say post-war reconstruction and rapid growth, can become a real liability when the economic and competitive landscape shifts dramatically. Their strengths in providing stability became weaknesses when agility and adaptability became paramount.
So, the big takeaway seems to be the vital importance of adaptability, of embracing diversity in people and ideas, really fostering innovation, and crucially, looking after employee well being. These aren't just nice to haves, they're essential for building organizations that can actually thrive today. It definitely gives you pause to think about our own workplaces, doesn't it? Are our structures and cultures really fit for the future, or are we holding on to things from a different era? A lot to consider.